Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 386 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today, I bring to you a conversation with John Brooks, one of the men who, sitting on an airplane over 20 years ago, conceived of and dreamt about, for the very first time, a tubeless insulin pump. Eventually, that pump became the Omnipod. And this is the story of how it came to be. John's the father of someone who has type 1 diabetes, and he tried to figure out how to help a long time ago when his son was diagnosed. This is what came of it. It's kind of crazy, right? While you're listening, please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Please always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. John's actually been involved in a lot of things around type 1 diabetes. We'll talk about all of it. But my initial reason for having him on was to learn about the birth of the Omnipod. Such an interesting idea, isn't it? Just something didn't exist, and then it did. Hey, if you're looking for a great way to support people living with type 1 diabetes while you support the podcast, go to t1dexchange.org/juicebox and join their registry. You'll answer a few simple questions about you or your child who has type 1 diabetes, and those answers will help support innovation in the type 1 world. It's that simple. It's completely HIPAA compliant, absolutely anonymous. You can opt out at any time, and it takes less than 10 minutes to complete right there from your phone or your computer. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. This episode is also sponsored by Touched by Type 1. Go to touchedbytype1.org to learn about an organization that is doing an incredible amount of good for people living with type 1 diabetes. Touched by Type 1 is also putting out their good stuff on Facebook and Instagram. And as a matter of fact, I believe the founder of Touched by Type 1 just had a beautiful little baby. So if you're interested in seeing cute little babies, definitely hit up their social media. touchedbytype1.org. Do you have a great doctor or need one? Check out juiceboxdocs.com. It's a great list of doctors who have been suggested by the listeners of this podcast. They're doctors that get it when you want to make adjustments to your insulin or don't want to just do, what everybody else does. Juiceboxdocs.com. Leave a name, take a name. If you're looking for those diabetes pro tip episodes to share with a friend, it's easy to get them to download an app, I guess, and say, hey, start at episode 210. That's where those diabetes pro tips begin. Or you can just send them to diabetesprotip.com. And please help me welcome a brand new sponsor to the weekly shows, Gvoke Glucagon. In the next few episodes, you'll begin hearing about Gvoke. Arden has already got it at home. We've got the Hypo Pen, and it's the bomb diggity. The absolute minute I heard there was a new glucagon that did not have to be mixed, I wanted to know more. You can learn more too at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. Gvoke is Gvoke. Glucagon, classic way, Glucan. That might have been wrong. Glucagon. Dear God, are we going to get involved in spelling glucagon right now? All right, gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. Or you could just, use your own brain instead of mine and just type it out. gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. Welcome to the show, Gvoke. t1dexchange.org/juicebox, and of course, touchedbytype1.org. Check them out when you have the time. I appreciate you doing this very much. I've often wondered about you, not knowing who you are, and I thought this is an interesting time to get your thoughts. I mean, if I'm not wrong, right? It's about 20 years since you started the company, right?
Yeah, it started Insulin. In fact, it's funny. I was just on the phone like 10 minutes ago with my co-founder and partner at Prism, Dwayne Mason. So we were just literally talking about that 20 years ago in May 2000.
Yeah. And now everything's getting ready to, I mean, I don't know how to think of it. I think they're going to take the thing you guys made and supercharge it, right? Like it's getting ready to take a leap, don't you think?
Yeah, well, I think, if you think of the world that, we started in, it was a device, right? A glucometer, a glucometer, was then going to drive an insulin pump. And now you look at it, it's the whole closed loop. It's the automated insulin delivery capability. But I think what's most important is the fact that it's less about the device. It's really the data, and it's the use of that data to drive better decisions, better clinical outcomes. And I think, with COVID and the way healthcare has changed, people want to be able to kind of get healthcare in their terms. They don't want to feel like they have a job to manage their diabetes, but, the more the burden we can take off of them, they want. And in today's environment, people are more prone. They don't want to go to the doctor's office. They don't want to go to the clinic. They don't want to go to the hospital. They want to be able to, get help and coaching and support for managing their diabetes, but on their terms. And, I think that's the beauty, whether it's Insulin or others. I mean, really leveraging the data, the analytics, the ability to basically determine, trends, to be able to look at time and range, to be able to look at, where there are any hiccups or, risks of hypoglycemia. So, it's kind of the evolution of healthcare that, if there was a silver lining to COVID, it's accelerated, all this virtual care, remote care, connected care, much faster than, it would have happened on its own. It was pretty slow. And now it's, changing dramatically.
So in the beginning, really, it's a tool, and the tool is the whole story. And now really the tool is just the way you take the data and make the decision. And then you don't have to go back to the doctor who would look at whatever data you had, whether they were finger sticks or log books or CGM graphs as time goes on, and say, look, I think you should turn this knob here, make this small adjustment. And now the data kind of understands that for you, I guess. It's really cool.
I mean, it's pretty much, I don't want to say autopilot because we're not quite there yet, but the idea is that, the algorithms, the systems get to know you. They get to understand, kind of what you do. A lot of people tend to do similar things day after day, whether it's their eating or whatever. So at the end of the day, the devices are going to become smarter and smarter, more predictive, and they'll try to determine not only what the right insulin dosing is, but, based on your prior history, based on what they've been able to track, they can almost anticipate here's what's going to happen and, kind of get ahead of the curve. So, I think it's the power of AI, it's the power of analytics. And then to your point, in the early days, I remember at Jocelyn, you'd have doctors having to look at, printouts from all the different flavors of BGMs. There was, a few folks on CGM, you had some ability to download data off of a pump, but none of it was connected. None of it was integrated. None of it was aligned. There was no even understanding if the dates on all the devices were the same. and obviously everything got shifted every twice a year when there was daylight savings time. So again, I think we've come a long ways and, more to go because, the sad part is despite a lot of great technology advances, we still do not have enough people with diabetes, especially people on insulin, meeting their objectives, getting their time and range. I mean, and again, I think it's an appreciation that, despite the fact we're making advances, there's more to, managing diabetes than just tracking blood sugars,
right.
Understanding now more about stress, understanding more about sleep habits, understanding more about, the food we eat, nutrition, and even the whole behavioral mental health aspects of diabetes. So the good news is, I think we're getting smarter. I think we're getting there. But, like anything else, it just doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of walk down memory lane for a second. So
Sure.
Tell me a little bit how you How did you come to this? And like you were saying before, like, I guess the concept wasn't as much about the pod at first as it was about just take me to the beginning. Like, what were you doing when this happened?
Yeah. So if I kind of walk back 28 years ago, our then 3-year-old son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes.
Okay.
And certainly, no real immediate family history. I didn't quite understand how that came about. And we were living in Colorado at the time. I was working for Pfizer on their device business. And, I decided that, I need to try to understand, diabetes, both type 1 and then eventually type 2. So, as my career and life advanced, diabetes was always an important component. And when when Pfizer ultimately divested themselves from all of the device businesses they were in, I came back to Boston. I was a co-founder of a venture capital firm called Prism Venture Partners. And, that's really what I said in the early days. I was looking at, companies that were trying to work on, non-invasive glucometers. People are trying to work on, how to determine glucose, in a very effective way. And, and then, as I said, a little more than 20 years ago, my partner and I were on a flight coming back from the West Coast, and I was describing, the challenges with, trying to figure out insulin delivery and, the problem with the existing, pumps as they were back then, with the tubing and the priming and the all the issues. And, we kind of brainstormed that entire 5-hour flight, and thought about, how do we come up with a, small disposable insulin delivery system, and the disposability happened to come out of another deal that we had done leveraging technology out of Sarnoff Corporation, which is where the RCA color TV was invented, if you will. And they had an interesting technology for a disposable hearing aid. And, that's another whole story. I won't get down there, but, we had the idea that disposability could be a very disruptive innovation. The idea is that every 3 days, someone puts on a new pod. We knew we could, hopefully do that in a very cost-effective way, eliminate all the problems with the tubing and the priming so that's kind of where the idea came from. And we got off the plane. The next day, we called up our patent attorney and said, "Hey, we have this idea for a disposable insulin delivery system." And he said, "Hey, no one's ever thought of that." And, we got a whole bunch of IP. And then we went to our, fellow partners at Prism and said, "Hey, we want some seed money to kind of flush out this idea, get it off the ground." And, we did that. And, we hired some people that had worked for us beforehand. We set up shop up in Beverly, Massachusetts, had a couple of people and pretty much told them, in the early days, just think about all the ways you can do this. Think about all the ways to create an IP position, and then little by little, we, had more ideas. We had more IP. We had more prototypes. And then, we went ahead and started to, put together a management team, build on the engineering team. And, little by little, we brought other investors in. And, here it is, 20 years later, very successful, multi-billion-dollar market cap company that, continues to drive innovation. But that was kind of the germination of it. And then, as I said, and most of my career since then, continues to be very heavily involved in diabetes. I had the opportunity, I guess it was probably about 8, almost 9 years ago, to run the Joslin Diabetes Center as CEO. So, someone unusual to have a fellow that I'm a UMass Amherst graduate, undergraduate in accounting, finance, and systems. So, you can see I learned enough over the years to be dangerous to be able to run a leading academic, medical research education center. But again, it was part of, as I said, 28 years ago, I was bound and determined to try to understand, how did my son get diabetes? And, is there an opportunity to think about a cure? And then, as I get further involved, came to appreciate that, certainly type 1 is a challenge, but, the whole, epidemic, I used to call it a pandemic of type 2 diabetes with, close to 460 million people around the world. So anyhow, I could go on and on, but
no, it's amazing.
That's how it came about.
I'm wondering how long after you take that plane ride are you holding a prototype?
It's a good question. It was probably, I want to say probably 9 months to a year. I mean, because again, we spent a lot of time. I mean, we probably had some drawings and ideas, but we wanted to really think about the intellectual property to make sure we had a good patent position. We wanted to make sure that we had a clear understanding that whatever we did, we needed to have a kind of a novel way to engineer it, because most pumps have a motor, and you're thinking if we have a disposable device that we said, hey, this thing's going to have to cost less than I think it was, I don't know, maybe $15-$20, and we said, well, if you put a pump in there, that's not going to do it. And then we thought about how to basically deliver very precise amounts of insulin. And in fact, kind of interestingly enough, we went back to Sarnoff and said, hey, here's our problem. And they actually come up with the idea of a heated wire, which basically is the mechanism that enables, when you heat the wire, it stretches and shrinks. And that ended up being kind of the mechanism to deliver the insulin very precisely and in a very cost-effective manner. So lots of, as I said, I'm sure we had prototypes and ideas along the way, but, it was more important to make sure that not only did we have a great design, did we have a design that was really going to, work, especially for kids and others. We used to call it hassle-free. So we didn't want priming. We didn't want tubing. We wanted to have a very easy way for the cannula to get placed. So, it was iteration, and it took a while. And then you got to figure out, how to really make sure it works. How do you figure out what the regulatory requirements are? How do you make sure how we get the insulin in? How do we make sure that, we can communicate? So, lots of steps along the way. So it doesn't happen overnight.
No, it's a really long process. Were there points along the way where you thought, we'll just get this to a certain point and sell it to somebody else? Did you ever think you were going to be the company that made the pumps and sold them?
Well, I think we did. We thought, hey, this is a very, novel idea, and we felt good about, as we did some early interaction with customers and focus groups, and we had, I think, from the very beginning, thought about the fact that this was the type of product that would lend itself to high-speed automation. I mean, we actually thought, at the time we had set shop in, trying to think where we were, Bedford, I think at the time. And after we left Beverly, where we started, and, we had the idea, hey, we're going to have a lights out factory. All these pumps are going to be put together by robots,
right?
And then, in some ways you go full circle. I mean, a lot of what takes place today, both in this great new factory that Insulin built up in Acton, a lot of automation, lots of ways to produce, massive numbers of pumps that are high quality. But, to answer your question, I think we always thought that, look, you got to build a great company, and maybe along the way, is someone likely to look at it? I mean, would a Medtronic, would somebody else say, hey, this is interesting? But, at the end of the day, I think we said, let's do this. And I remember, some of the greatest moments, when I was at Jocelyn, I remember we had Jocelyn had the Jocelyn camp for boys out in Oxford, Mass. And it was right next to the camp for girls. But, seeing all the kids, with their pods on, swimming in the pond, I mean, that was pretty neat, because before that, as you got to disconnect your pump, you got to take it off. You can't get it in water if you're using a traditional, tube pump and all. So, so I think we were always motivated by the fact that, hey, this is a better way to help not just kids, but families and people that want to get insulin, and, they want to do it in a way that, it's discreet, it works for them, and they don't have to worry about all the hassle, that, some of the other tube pumps, have gotten better, but still exist.
Yeah. Well, no, my daughter's been wearing an Omnipod every day for 13 years. So I'm completely aware of the benefits of just having your basal insulin while you're in that pond. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's amazing.
Because before, kids would take the pumps off and, it's a hot summer day and maybe they even put them under the towel, but, the pumps are getting warm and, maybe they're not wearing them for a certain amount of time. I mean, at the end of the day, that's just not good therapy, right?
Right. No, it's 100%. I've been through the new manufacturing facility. I've taken the tour.
It's amazing, right?
It's unbelievable. Just astonishing what they accomplished and watching it happen. And like you said, things are kind of moving around automatically and it's nuts.
Yeah.
And I don't think the precision is considered. Like I want to try to understand without getting too geeky and technical. You're telling me that inside of that pod, there's not a pump sending the insulin through the cannula?
So it's basically a mechanism that emulates a pump, but it's not a traditional pump with a motor and all. So, so it's a different approach. And, and I'd say that's really the other, key thing about, being able to produce the number of pods that are needed. We're, replacing them every 3 days. And so, I think the other important thing was to, put a lot of focus on dimensions, tolerances, the tooling. I mean, this is a product that, the tolerances are critical. The making sure you're working with the right vendors, the vendors deliver the right product. And, because we did have, in the early days, there was always a little bit of a concern about, could we, batch to batch consistency. In the early days, we used to joke we were shipping dollar bills with every pump, because we didn't have the volume, we didn't have the scale, we didn't have the full economic benefits. So, but, that's part of the learning curve. And then when we, they went to a generation 2, which was smaller, more precise and more, kind of cost effective. There were some hiccups in the early days when, things don't quite go the way you expect. And, you just kind of work through them and hopefully, convince your loyal users that, hey,
it's
sorry,
coming.
And we'll send you some replacements, hang in there. But, the good thing is I think that's all behind the company now. And I think now they're focused on, kind of what I'd say is their, Gen 5 product. They've got Dash, they've got Horizon. I mean, they're really, as I said at the beginning, recognizing that it's no longer just about delivering insulin, but it's the context of, doing it in a way that understands how that individual is living their life, understanding, kind of what their, smart CGM and other devices are saying, and, optimizing, what their requirements are. So they're staying in range, they're avoiding hypos and hypers, and their care team can continue to kind of fine tune, what they're doing.
Are you still involved, or did you eventually sell your share, or how does that work?
Yeah. So when I went to the Jocelyn, I just made a conscious decision. I think it was certainly the right one. Maybe not economically, but I divested all my shares. I just, because we were doing some things, and if you're the CEO of a not-for-profit with the prestige of Jocelyn, I just didn't want to have any perceived conflicts and all. So, I'm happy to say today I'm still an owner, but I pretty much divested everything for the 5 years that I was running Jocelyn.
I see. Okay. Oh, all right. That's what we wanted the president to do that he didn't do. Is that what we're saying? That whole, you just sort of take yourself, not to be political, but you kind of take yourself out of the...
Look, it's the right thing to do. I mean, if we were doing some work, maybe some of the doctors at Jocelyn, which they were doing different, studies or clinical trials. Yeah, you could argue, well, I don't have anything to do with that, but it's appearances, and it's really good governance. And frankly, I think it's just having a good moral, ethical compass. So, was I going to influence results? No, but you never want to have even the suggestion of impropriety. And I just said, look, this is the right thing to do.
Right. That's excellent. Oh, that's very cool. So you're still involved then, and you're an owner at this point still.
Well, I'm a shareholder with, a small one with other people.
Yeah,
but,
you're saying somebody else is listening to this right now going, I have way more than John does.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. I'm sure every major, public equity fund out there, mutual funds. But no, I'm happy to, do that. And, full disclosure, I have stock holdings in other, diabetes companies because, whether it's on the CGM side or, looking at pumps. And then I work with, a lot of young companies that are working on, what I'd call the next generation solutions, whether it's new insulins, whether it's a new type of CGM. There's some companies working on, new pumps, the companies working on defeating the autoimmune system, companies working on, better real-time insulin titration for people with type 2. So about 80% of what I do, these days is still, helping especially young companies. And I'm either doing it as the chairman of the board member, advisor, consultant, trying to make sure that, what I've learned over the years and, how can I help them turn themselves into a successful company that is going to further help people, with type 1 or type 2 to, live better, healthier, safer lives.
That's cool. How old's your son now?
My son is going to actually turn 31 next month, so just a few weeks away. He works for this company called Livongo.
Oh, I know it. Yeah, sure.
You've heard of them. He was literally one of the very first people there. In fact, he was with the predecessor company called EOS Health. So he's based out in Chicago. Has been with them, I guess it's been 8 years, and he manages their sales effort in the Midwest. So I guess he's had another, I think opportunity. He has type 1, but he devotes a lot of his time to help Livongo get solutions for self-insured employees who need help with diabetes, and now they're moving it to hypertension, weight management, behavior, et cetera, et cetera. And they went public, and now they're being acquired by Teladoc. So he's keeping busy, but he's pretty excited that he made a good career choice when he graduated from college.
I have to ask you, because I'm not sure where you're going to go with this, but does he wear an Omnipod?
So he doesn't. It's interesting.
All this effort, John, that you put into this.
I know. But, at the end of the day, and I'm sure you might even know with your daughter, what? It's their life, it's their decision. And, and again, he's always been a fan. He's talked about it, but, just one of those things where, I don't know why it just didn't fit his schedule or didn't have the time. So at the end of the day, he may, but today he's not on it, but it's not a sign that he doesn't believe in it. It's just,
no, I don't think that. Hey, listen, Omnipod has been a sponsor of this podcast since the beginning for many, many years. And I always tell people the same thing. Get a demo pod, try it. It's for you or it's not. It's, there are other insulin pumps. You could do MDI. You could, get an InPen. There's 1,000 things you could do.
Yeah. The real key is to, use technology in a way that works for you, and obviously, whether it's, CGM with a pump. And, the idea is, I think people realize, that, all of a sudden their lives are better. They're in range. They don't have the glycemic excursions, and and it fits into their lifestyle. So I think that's really the key. I do some work with the ADA, and we had a discussion recently with Insulin, just kind of getting to know each other. Bob Gabay is the new chief medical officer, chief scientific officer for the ADA, and he was in the call. I had hired him at Jocelyn, so he's a great person. But the whole idea is essentially just, I think an appreciation that, people that have been on MDI, maybe just thought, look, pumps are too complicated. They look like they're, not going to work for me. And, obviously, I think once, to your point, they try them, all of a sudden they realize they're pretty straightforward. And, and I think, companies are sensitive to making sure that, they're affordable and, that they work for people. And again, I think the payers, the insurers, I think, understand that they're cost effective. I mean, it wasn't too many years ago where, you had to jump through hoops to justify having someone get a CGM or even a pump, but,
Yeah.
The good news is the data's there and the value's there, and, the world's, continuing to evolve.
What was the most difficult, if there's one difficult part of getting the Omnipod to market? Was it the function of it and the mechanics of it, or was it the FDA, or is it insurance? Like, I guess
it's a good question. Part of it, I would say is just, a disposable pump. It took a little while for people to get their heads around that. I remember we had some people saying, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard of. I think the regulatory path, we went through it, but I think, I spent years, kind of, working at Pfizer, really a lot of device companies. I do a lot of biotech and other things, but, still know the device space. My partner Dwayne knew that. So, I think the key is we weren't all that concerned about the regulatory. A big part of it was reimbursement. I mean, you have to go kind of payer by payer across the country. We kind of started in New England and, kept going west to get payers to agree, because it's a different approach. I mean, everybody else, you have this upfront investment for the pump, right? And then you have all the disposables. And in our case, we were kind of turning that upside down. It's really a subscription model effectively, and trying to get, payers to understand that. How did it fit into their reimbursement? Even the federal government, would say, if you're on Medicare, you can only get, one pump every 4 years. Well, if you're getting a new pump every 3 days and, just things like that. I mean, sometimes the way the reimbursement was set up, it didn't understand that, hey, this was a very different form factor, economic value proposition. And, you had to get people comfortable with it. And then they had to understand, at the end of the day, if you looked at it over 4 years, versus the cost of a traditional pump, they're pretty comparable. But,
right.
When you're first starting off, people there, well, how does this work? And that's not the way we do it. And, so there was just a lot of, pioneering. And, I think the other part of it was just, understanding the manufacturing, despite the idea that we thought it would make sense to have this great lights out factory. We realized that, we needed a different solution. And in fact, ended up getting involved with Flextronics, and, leverage their expertise in high speed automation, and, ended up setting up some, the supply chain, generally in China, because, we wanted to, make sure our economics worked. And
right.
Now it's ironic. It's kind of coming full circle, back to the US. But, so, getting that manufacturing and getting the cost of goods sold was something that we always, spent a lot of time on, because you don't have a good business if you're, losing money on every shipment, but you got to have the volumes. You have to have the, sufficient economics to support, getting the cost per unit down. And so that took some time.
I was going to say, even understanding, hearing you talk about having to go state by state and explain to payers, like, this is how it's going to work. And, I know this isn't what you usually do, but this is this. I've had those conversations for my daughter. And back in the day, you'd have to get on the phone every time you reordered and say, no, listen. I know we just got a pump. That's not, and then you'd have to re-explain it to somebody. It was fascinating how many times I've done that.
Yeah, no. Yeah. And, if you think on the CGM side, I mean, I remember in the early days, payers were reluctant to allow someone to have a CGM or reimburse them for it, because if their numbers were in pretty good shape, they say, well, you don't need a CGM, or maybe you don't need a pump. And then the whole idea was, well, you almost had to have people deliberately, mess up their diabetes management for 30 days to show that, well, you're not in good control, therefore you should get it. I mean, if you think of the absurdity of that,
yeah.
But, that was part of it. And, we used to have a lot of our great doctors at Jocelyn, I mean, spending more time on the phone with insurers,
Mhm.
And even silly things like, why does someone with type 1, why do you need to check your blood sugars with a BGM, 8 times a day? Just do it 2 days. What are you doing? I
Right.
mean, just absurdity.
Yeah. No, the lack of understanding, it permeates pretty much
Well, and
every
especially,
aspect of
as you
it.
know, type 1 versus type 2. I mean, a lot of people just still don't fully understand, that, it's diabetes, but, it's a very different mechanism. It's not like if you have type 1, avoid sugar, you're going to be great.
I just was speaking with a person last night whose child is more newly diagnosed. And this podcast, John, which you probably don't know anything about, I take great pride in it. It explains to people, among other things, how to use insulin. And like, my daughter's A1C with the Dexcom and Omnipod is between 5.2 and 6.2 for over 6 years now. She has
Which is
no
great.
diet restrictions. She's
Yep.
doing terrific. I talk about what we do here. It seems to get to people in a way that they can understand it and replicate it for themselves. So I'm talking to this person and she's like, I don't understand. Why does my endocrinologist not understand? Like, why am I talking to you and not her? And I said, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you about that. But it's what it made me think when you were talking through it, that most people would hear this and think, well, how could an insurance company not understand what diabetes is? Or how could, and the answer is because people don't,
Yeah, well, I mean, they, and again, nothing against the people there, but, anytime you bring something new or a different business model, different approach, it doesn't kind of fit the traditional, scheme, and you got to educate them and you got to do the analysis, and, they just tend to be a little bit change resistant, right?
Yeah. You fall into something that you're comfortable with and it works, whether you're a company or a person. And you stop having reasons to wonder about other ways to do things. So
yeah, exactly.
You come along with this little pod and you're like, hey, listen, this is the way to go. And
it's like the early days. Well, what do you mean after 3 days you throw it away? Like, well, why are you throwing it away?
Right. Yeah.
It's designed that way.
Yeah, that's what it's for.
Yeah, exactly.
It really, if you can't say, or you shouldn't, I'm not sure, but I've forever want to understand while, you get your pod out, you fill it up, it primes, take off the needle cap, you put it on, and you say, go ahead, insert it. And then there's this clicking that is sometimes 4 times it clicks, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 6. And then, blink of an eye, the cannula is in. In my estimation, it's always been that something fires a needle that's wrapped in a cannula in, the needle comes out, leaves the cannula behind. But is it not functionally firing? Is it tension? How does it do? Can you tell me how it does that?
Yeah, I don't know what it does today. It's probably different than it was, but I think your point's accurate. I mean, the whole idea was to get rid of needle phobia, to be able to have a very simple way, to your point, to deploy the cannula, with a needle that would place it properly and then, disengage itself. So all you had was the cannula to deliver the insulin. So, yeah, I mean, I don't want to speculate because I'm not sure how it works today.
No,
but,
please.
The idea was to basically, deliver it in a way that, it would get into the skin at the right level, and, not cause any bruising, hypertrophy. I mean, there was a lot of work that went into the needle design and the shape and the insertion, pressure, force, whatever you want to call it. So, but yeah, I'm probably, it's been a while since I've looked inside of one. It prompts me. I probably have an old one around here I should look into.
I'm now wondering about the day in the office where somebody was like, all right, put it on me and push the button and let's see what happens. That's how many people do you think in total were there in the beginning?
Well, in the very beginning, there were 2 of us on an airplane, right? But then, we ended up, as I said, we had a team. We were up in the Cummings facility in Beverly, Mass. After we had our partners had put some seed money in, we hired a guy that, really brilliant in terms of, just looking at the entire intellectual property landscape. Were there any other patents? Was anyone else doing anything? And how would we, think about creating the product? How would we think about, what type of plastic, what type of, materials? We thought a lot about, as I said, quote unquote, the pumping mechanism. We thought a lot about the cannula and the insertion mechanism and, what the battery life is and how to make sure that, those accuracies. So in the early days, it was a bunch of really bright people, probably more engineering, folks that knew devices, folks that knew IP, folks that understood we had to be able to make this thing very cost effectively. And you kind of designing it and building it on the fly. And then, we reached the point where, I think we felt we had a good plan. We had a good business plan. We hired a fellow as our CFO, who eventually became the CEO, Dwayne DeSisto. And then, we as the company advanced, we brought more money in. We brought in other venture partners. Our team continued to support it. And then, we ended up getting, new space. We left Beverly and, we started to hire a more, larger team, in terms of, recognizing that, what do you need to have in addition to engineering, you got to have people that are, working on the supply chain. You got to have people that are working on, understanding the whole regulatory process, quality process, starting to think about reimbursement, starting to think about, packaging. So, you start building a team and, that took place over, a number of years, where you go from kind of an idea that we had to, starting to think about, what it should look like. And again, just simple things like, what type of plastic and what type of plastic are you going to mold and what's the shape and how much stuff can you fit into it and still have it work, but not be too big. And, just lots of, iterations that, you get a team and then you start getting people thinking about how do you market it? What are we going to call it? All that stuff.
Right.
In the early days, we used to call it the OP.
It must be crazy to be a startup in a space that is like, pharma and device manufacturing, like bigger companies, and you're sort of just these, you're two guys coming off a plane and putting together things. By the way, the company still has a really good vibe, throughout it. You can tell what the root, as you're explaining what the roots of it are, it doesn't surprise me. Because I think it's grown in that direction. Yeah, no, it's pretty neat. I mean, every now and then, in fact, at the last ADA meeting, not the virtual one, but, my son was with me and, we were kind of walking the floor and, went by the booth and, it's kind of one of those funny things where, a couple of the people start putting the dots together. Wait a minute, you're the father, you're the son. I mean, all of a sudden they realized that, we were kind of the my son was the inspiration and, I was one of the co-founders. It's kind of neat. And again, still having that, you could call, kind of that entrepreneurial spirit and, right.
Really thinking, what I always like to think of disruptive innovation. And again, I spent, especially back in those days, most of my career was in the device world. I, had ran a couple of businesses for Pfizer. One of them was actually a company that had infusion pumps. And, so, we certainly knew a lot about, delivering, whether it's insulin or other drugs, knew a lot about, device manufacturing, regulatory, so anyhow, you leverage all that. And, at the end of the day, you hire bright, smart, capable people who frankly thrive in a small company environment. I mean, in a small company, forget about your title. Everybody's working hard. Everybody's working late. Everyone has a passion for, doing what we're doing because we're going to improve the lives of people with diabetes.
Really have, honestly. Yeah. Hey, listen, is this too ham-fisted or maybe this happens all the time, but do people call you the Podfather? I mean, I
haven't. I've never heard anyone call me that.
Well, then I'm doing it right now because that seems like an obvious pun. I mean, honestly, and what an absolute parenting story it is too. Like you're like, let me do this thing for you, and you do it, and you build this entire thing for it. And at the end, he's like, that's nice, but I'm not going to use it.
And again, he very well, decided at some point he wants
to do it. Yeah.
And again, he's doing great things in the world of, helping employers and payers and all help their patients with diabetes and now hypertension, weight management, as I said. And
that's really nice.
Soon, to be, part of Teladoc, which takes it even to a bigger stage.
I'm having, I honestly, the experience that we've had with my daughter doing telemedicine over the last number of months, I think has been an incredible improvement over what we had been doing prior to that. Honestly,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you think of it, I mean, and I did some piloting at Joslin. I mean, this is many years ago, and it was hard to get great clinicians, but they were just used to meeting people in their office. If you think of diabetes, I mean, it's the best way to treat people, because what do you do physically? You don't really need to do anything. Yeah. There's no procedures. You're, helping people, and the diabetes nurse educators and the dietitians. And so, but, before we had to do it with COVID, it's just people are convinced, well, you have to do it that way.
Right.
And in some ways, it was just people were resigned to the fact that I'm going to spend an hour to drive into Boston. I'm going to spend $40-$50 to park. I'm going to sit in the waiting room and wait, because this is a, global leader, and all the clinicians are bright and busy, and, that's the price you got to pay. And, now if you said, hey, let's go back to that, people there, nope, not going to do it.
I don't think that anything's been more gratifying in the last 3 months than sending an email to somebody and saying, like, my daughter has hypothyroidism too, and saying, hey, I think Arden's a little hyper right now. And she emails back a script. We get a blood draw, and the next day they move the tyrosine down a level, and it's done in 24 hours almost. Okay. And before, like you said, get an appointment, come in, take a day off from school, like all this other stuff to maybe get an answer in a month if you're lucky. Really,
it's a change. And again, I think as we're saying, I mean, I think diabetes lends itself to, having smart devices, analytics, AI, and the ability to basically let the care team, monitor from afar how people are doing, and make sure they get the right coaching, the right encouragement, but the idea is essentially make the lives of people with diabetes easier and take the burden off of them, and, give them an opportunity to basically live a, healthy life, and, avoid, what used to happen, was people developing complications, and, not that they don't exist, but, I think we're doing a much better job of, making sure we get ahead of the curve and not waiting for someone to have, eye problems or kidney problems or vascular problems. I mean, the whole idea is, keep people in range, and keep the excursions, and, don't let things get to the point where, the problems start arising.
Yeah, you have to be proactive for certain. I have two last questions for you. I thought I was only going to have one, but now I have two because of your time at Joslin. How do you, is it obvious to somebody like you that there's an issue with clinicians not understanding diabetes as well as the people who have diabetes? And how do you speed up their understanding so they can help newer people?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And look, whether it's Joslin or other places, sure. I mean, just very talented individuals, but, especially a place like Joslin, part of the Harvard complex. I mean, academic medicine, people are brilliant, but, there tends to be a lot of clinical inertia. They want to see data. They want to see papers. They want to see peer-reviewed journal articles before they fully get on board. And the other part of it is, I think, they're busy people. And as much as they're going to keep up with all the new developments, all the new information, it takes a little while. And, but I think today, with a lot of, capabilities built into the electronic health records, there's ways for, clinicians to be able to, get a better handle on how this individual is doing, what are the other potential comorbidities or factors that are going on, and then, which is the right approach. And, if you have type 1, what type of devices, and, do I still think about putting you on some sort of, SGLT2 inhibitor? I mean, so, but the issue is, I think it was just, busy people, and, just trying to deal with all the stuff they had to deal with. And then after they get done seeing patients, make sure they put all of their information into the, billing systems so the bills could go out on time. And so, I think it was just easy for people to kind of get into I don't have time to think, I just got to react. And
right.
So, now I think it's easier. And with, as we said, with kind of the whole virtual care, I think it's just easier to be able to focus on, for an individual, what is it that we should talk about during this time we have, and that the doctors don't have to spend time kind of reviewing or trying to make sense on the fly out of CGM plots. And now the information is there. It's more a question of helping determine for that person with diabetes, what's the best way to help you even further improve, and to be there if people are still struggling, because as there's still challenges. I'm on the board of the College Diabetes Network, chairman there. And, we spend a lot of time, if you think of it, college students, dealing with diabetes in this environment, virtual hybrid classes, and, the whole, side of diabetes around depression and, behavioral health and all. So, so in some ways, life is getting easier, but life is getting more complicated, right?
Right. No, it's interesting. I have such a personal experience over time where it's going to sound crazy, but I could sit down with you in an hour and explain diabetes to you in a way where you would just understand it and you'd be able to put it into practice. I've practiced for a decade or more writing about it and talking about it. And just when you see someone struggling who has great care, what really is considered great care, and then they come along. I mean, think about it really, John. Then they come along and listen to a podcast, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I understand now. And then they're off and they're okay. It feels like there's a disconnect somewhere in between that, you know what I mean?
Sometimes, maybe the key is, you got to make sure you're connecting with people at their level. Maybe some people, especially in type 2, a lot of people are told by maybe it's their primary care doctor. And again, I'm not trying to malign anyone, but you have diabetes and here's what you need to do. And I'm going to put you on metformin. Well, at the end of the day, I used to hear from many people, well, I don't really know what it means when I have diabetes. They don't understand things. Yeah. And maybe they say, well, I'll avoid sugar, but, I can have pasta, rice. That's healthy, right? Mm-hmm. No understanding, kind of how our bodies work.
Right.
When I was a kid, many, many years ago, we actually had something in school called a nutrition class and health class, and you actually had some idea how our bodies work. I don't think we're teaching that to kids anymore. Yeah. So the idea is a lot of people just, even though if you're in it, it's kind of like, well, why don't you understand it? Some people just don't fully understand, like, well, what do you mean my pancreas isn't going to produce insulin, or, it's not producing enough insulin, or, I'm watching my blood sugars, but, I'm in competitive sports, or I'm stressed out, or, and people start realizing there's all these other factors that affect your glucose. You can eat the same meal every day, do the same thing, but if you're stressed out one day, or you didn't sleep well or something, you're going to have different results. And a lot of people don't fully appreciate, well, why is that?
Yeah. I think that when I start talking to people privately, which I do sometimes, just as, I don't know, I think it makes me better at being on the podcast to have one-on-one conversations with people that aren't recorded sometimes. But when I start off by telling them, look, you have to get your basal insulin right because nothing's going to work if that's not right. And then you really need to pre-bolus to understand how your insulin works. When I get to the third thing and say you need to understand the glycemic load and the glycemic index of foods, I don't think that's what they think they're going to hear next. And when you tell somebody that, 10 carbs of one food and 10 carbs of another food are going to impact you differently, I completely agree with you. It fries their mind. They're like, no, they told me to count the carbs.
Does. And, and again, we're learning a lot about, what else is affecting, gastric emptying, which foods tend to get into the bloodstream faster. Again, there's a lot of complexity that, not that we want to make it even more confusing for people, but the hope is that, over time, devices are going to start incorporating, if you think of all the wearables, people are starting to pick up on heart rate variability. They're starting to pick up on sleep. And at some point in time, maybe those additional inputs, might further cause the algorithms to be even smarter.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, we're having a better way to help people with diabetes, understand that, blood sugar is fine, but that's not the only ingredient that's kind of driving, what's going on.
Yeah, maybe one day the pump will know that, hey, I had pizza, so the cheese is slowing down the digestion, but now the cheese is gone and everything's going through me quicker and not impacting me the same way.
Yeah, and again, a lot of pumps are going to say, hey, I remember the last time you had insulin, and here's what happened, and instead of you having to figure out a square wave bolus, whatever, the system's going to basically say, yeah, I remember that. Let me make sure that I'm adjusting your insulin. Or if you're an athlete, I remember, when my son played high school sports, or, we used to have a lot of kids at Jocelyn, playing competitive sports. And, the issue is, your blood sugars, you may be fine during the game, and then 8 hours after game time, you're crashing. And,
I don't understand why.
Part of that's, how do your muscles reload? So anyhow, it's complicated, but we're chipping away at, getting it there. And maybe in the background, we've got people working on, either, beta cell regeneration, protecting the immune system. I mean, there's lots of other good things going on that I'm on top of as well. So maybe someday we'll make all this moot.
That's my last question is, what do you see coming that is exciting to you? Because I just had Dr. Jeffrey Millman on the other day from WashU, and he was talking about stem cells and how they're getting cells now to sense glucose, make insulin, not be seen as by your body as a foreign. It's all amazing. Like,
it is, but and it's happening, in different parts of the world. There's people working on, defeating the autoimmune process. People working on, basically protecting the beta cells. There are people working on regenerating the beta cells. There are people working on encapsulation. There are people working on, new treatments. You look at some of the stuff. Denise Faustman, at MGH with BCG, and, so lots of advancements. People are making headway. You look at, Sema, which was a Doug Melton company, now part of Vertex. And all of a sudden you got a very big pharmaceutical company working on, beta cell encapsulation. You got other companies that are in that space. And little by little, we're kind of cracking why the regulatory T cells go awry, and, how do you do that? So, we could talk for another couple hours on all the things that I see, and, I'm usually involved because, I just get motivated by that. And again, companies sometimes seek me out because they know I know enough to be dangerous, and maybe I can help them either get financed or advanced, right?
Understand how to get through the whole process. That's got to be such a huge part of it, is just having somebody with you that can help guide you around the pitfalls, right? That's got to be
I've been doing this for a while, and seen the good, bad, the ugly, but the hope is that at the end of the day, a lot of these companies, the challenge is getting the financing and having a value proposition that's compelling to investors, and making sure that they've thought through the timelines around regulatory issues, quality issues, reimbursement issues. And in today's day and age, it's the old Wayne Gretzky line, you don't want to develop something, to solve today's problem. It's where's that puck going to be 5 years from now?
Got to skate where the puck's going, right?
Where's that competitive landscape going to be? Who else is out there? And how to make sure that you're, kind of leapfrogging the competition, not just incrementally saying, hey, I got a better mousetrap, and, you're already kind of behind the times. So
I tell people when they're using their insulin that everything you do now is for later, and everything that is happening now is from something that you did in the past. And I think that thinking like that in general is a great idea. Well, John, thank you. I don't want to take up any more of your time, but I do want to leave you with something, because I don't know that I fully wrap my head around this sentiment that gets given to me a lot until you were talking about your son. But people thank me. My daughter does not come on this podcast, right? She's 16. She doesn't care about a podcast. And people tell me all the time how grateful they are that her situation led to their success. And now I'm realizing as I'm sitting here is that this podcast really is born out of my concern for my daughter. And she's wearing an insulin pump that was born out of your concern for your son. So it's very kind of chilling, honestly.
Well, I'm sure he'd be interested. So at some point in time, you want to do a podcast with my son, I think you're going to find, he's even sharper than I am. So
I'm going to do that. Yeah, no, I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think of it, I mean, he's understands this disease because he lives with it every day, and working for a company that now is extremely successful, and had some interesting experiences along the way. So you might want to get him on a podcast. I think you'd find it pretty entertaining.
Well, it'll be easier for me to find him than it was for me to find you, because you just would go around saying to people like, the guy that made the pod, what's his name? And finally one of my friends at Omnipod's like, it's John. And I was like, oh, is that him? And she goes, yeah. I said, I think I know someone at T1D Exchange. I'll be fine. I was like, I'll figure it out. Which is another great organization that you sit on the board of. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. T1D Exchange, College Diabetes Network. So if it's diabetes related, I'd like to think I can be helpful in some way.
Well, I'll know I'm doing well when you want to invest in me.
Sounds good.
John, thanks so very much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, pleasure. All right.
Take care. Have a good day.
Take care. Yep. Bye.
Bye. Hey, huge thanks to the Podfather, John Brooks. Can you imagine it if people, by the way, if you know John, start calling him the Podfather. I'd like to see that pick up if you guys can make that happen. Thank you. Anyway, John, thanks so much for coming on the show and for sharing your amazing and very unique experience dreaming up an insulin pump. Thanks also to the T1D Exchange, t1dexchange.org/juicebox. Join that registry today. Support diabetes research, support the podcast. And Touched by Type 1, touchedbytype1.org. Thank you to those sponsors. And of course, welcome Gvoke Glucagon to the family of sponsors here at the Juicebox Podcast. Learn more about that pre-mixed, pre-filled glucagon or the HypoPen at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. There are links in your show notes and at juiceboxpodcast.com to all of the wonderful and, may I say, delightful sponsors of the Juicebox Podcast. Check them out if you would. Thank you. Hey, last thing. The Facebook page for the podcast is blowing up. I mean, that is what the kids would say, right? It's blowing up. Be like, what do they say about their phones and stuff? I'm very old. I don't know what people say, but that's not the point. The point is, on Facebook, there's a public group. It's called Bold with Insulin. And there's a private group, Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. That private group, up to 6,000 users just about. Huh? Is that bananas? 6,000 people in there just helping each other out. It's amazing. It's the kindest place you'll ever find on Facebook. Hand to wherever you want to hold your hand up to when you're swearing on things. I mean it. I've never seen a nicer, kinder, more thoughtful, less egotistical, more lovely and delightful group of people helping each other with type 1 diabetes than I have right there in that group. I am as proud of how that group functions as I am about anything else connected to this podcast. It's really, it's quite something. And the public group has like 10,000 people following it. I'm really stunned. I am. I'm not really a Facebook person, but it turned out to be quite a little resource, and I'm super happy about it. All right. I hope you have a great day. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation with John, learning more about how the Omnipod came to be. I really did. And what else? Feels like I have nothing left to say. So that is that.